Okay. I've been attempting to read as of recent, and over the past 2 months, I've read a grand total of, just wait for it, 5 books. I never claimed to be good at this. So we're going to talk about the 5 books that I read over the past 2 months. And we're going to start off with 2 very hyped and well-loved adult novels, one of which came out recently, and that's Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Yellowface is about this mediocre white woman author named June Haywood who really wants to be successful, and she's super envious of her best frenemy, what's her name again? Athena Liu, who is a much more famous, successful, and more talented author than her. Athena is also Asian, and June kind of believes that part of the reason why Athena is so successful is because of, the whole diversity thing. Anyways, fast forward to the first chapter of the book. Athena dies, rest in peace, and before the rigor mortis gets time to set in, Miss June makes way with Athena's latest manuscript and publishes it as her own. So she basically steals a book from a dead author, publishes it as her own, just, because she's a bad person. So this book is really a novel about a bad person trying to do a bad thing and seeing how long she can get away with it. And it's quite interesting. It's really meant to be somewhat of a commentary on the publishing industry, racism, and performative diversity in the publishing industry, as well as somewhat of a critique of the reading community as well. June is rightfully called out throughout the book because first, before people realize that she stole the manuscript, they just feel like it's not her place as a white woman to tell an Asian story. And then when it becomes clearer throughout the story that that might have been what she did, the backlash just gets worse and worse. And while the backlash is definitely justified, the book kind of also comments on how this barrage of online harassment and critique, the sort of cancel culture, as we like to call it, is really counterproductive and doesn't really solve anything. So the main thing I like about this book is the way that it attempts to be a commentary on things that are relevant to, the reading world and the publishing industry. My problem with this book, and the reason why I don't think it really works, is because of the way that it's supposed to be framed. As far as I understand, this book is marketed as a satire of the publishing industry, and parts of it try to be satirical. The beginning of the book is very satirical. In my opinion, I'm not a literary expert. I can't give you a definition of what satirical literature is supposed to be. But in my experience, from the few satirical books that I've read, they're supposed to have this element of ridiculousness. They're almost supposed to be borderline camp, if that makes sense. I'm thinking Beauty Queens by Libba Bray, for example. But that element has to be there throughout the story. And I think that's where Yellowface falters. It starts off like that. It starts off very ridiculous in the first scene. And then the rest of the story just feels like a normal contemporary adult novel. Then we get to the end when the big plot twist happens, and I'm just the beginning of the book and the end of the book kind of expects you to suspend your disbelief because that's what you're supposed to do in a satirical novel. But when the majority of the middle of the book doesn't match the same tone, you sort of let that guard down, and then when you reach the end and this sort of ridiculous, hard to believe plot twist happens, it just feels weird, I don't know. So, is this book overhyped? I would say so, but I'm not gonna blame the author or even readers for that. This is very much a book that I think the publishing industry really wanted to push. And I don't think it's a bad book. I don't think it doesn't deserve the success that it's gotten. But it's interesting to see how, based on a lot of the reviews that I've seen, a lot of people are just kind of meh about it. It's a fairly mid book, but it's okay. You should give it a try. The other really popular, well-loved book that I read is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. And although I also didn't think that this was that great, I still really loved it. This is definitely one of the best books that I read for the year, which is not really saying much because I only read 13 books for the year. Piranesi follows this guy named Piranesi who lives in this sort of otherworldly place that is a labyrinth, and it's its own world, and only him and one other person who he calls the other lives in this world. And Piranesi's job is mostly to just explore and take notes and observations of the different halls and the statues that exist in the halls throughout the labyrinth. It's supposed to be inspired by some kind of Greek mythology, but I don't know jack shit about Greek mythology, so I don't know what it's supposed to be inspired by. Anyways, throughout the story, even though it's only supposed to be 2 people in this world, of course Piranesi starts to find things, little messages written all over the halls that may indicate that there's another person or more people there than he expected. The first 50 pages or so were quite confusing. I'm just what is the point of the story? Where are we going with this? And then as it begins to unravel, you get, it starts to get really interesting. Like, it's so good. I can't really say too much about it because it would spoil it for you, but what I will say is that I appreciate how, to me, this will sort of functioned as this kind of allegory for the systems that we live by and live under, whether you're talking about political systems, economic systems, religion. You know, we live according to particular ideologies and belief systems that we believe are innate and we believe that guide us. But then, you know, we start to see through the cracks and we realize that a lot of this world that we've constructed isn't really what it seems, and actually there might be something bigger out there that we have to face and reconcile with. And that was sort of my interpretation. What I didn't really expect from this book was how much of myself I would see in Piranesi. First of all, I'm a graduate student, so I really relate to his whole research journaling gig. But also, he just has this like innate trust for everyone. He just wants to help everyone. He wants to see the good in everyone. And he's really trying to trust the system that he lives in, whilst also remaining healthily skeptical of things. Listen, I can't even get into it, but I just saw so much of myself in him. And there was a part in particular where he writes a letter to somebody who he believes has now entered his world. And it was so sweet, and I kind of cried. And I don't usually cry in books, and I'm like, oh my god, I need a life.
This is so sad.
It's so good. It was so good. My only qualm with this book really is that, listen, I love short books. I appreciate when a book is short. This book is like 200 something pages, so I got through it fairly quickly. Sometimes I do wish that some books could have been a bit longer, and I think this book would have benefited from being a bit longer. I think if we had gotten a little bit more time to really, you know, even though the world was very visceral and well described, if we had more time to just explore this world, and if we had a little bit more time dedicated to developing the background of the characters, I think I would have been so much more invested in this. I think it would have had a longer lasting impact on me, even though I still really liked it. Then I read some kids' books, which is ironic considering that I made a video recently where I talked about why I don't read YA anymore, and then I read some YA books. I reread one of my favorite books of all time, which is Aristotle and Dante Discovered the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Saenz. This is a very special book for me. I read it back in 2016, and it's the first novel that I ever read that features queer characters. So this is a very foundational book for me, and it's such a lovely story. It's about this young boy named Ari who meets another boy named Dante. They're both, you know, young Mexican-American kids growing up in the 1980s. So, you know, that particular context presents a challenge for Ari, who is coming to terms with his sexuality, but also really just coming to terms with the fact that he's in love with Dante and doesn't quite know how to express that, make sense of that, and vocalize it. And the entire story is really just about that. Like, it doesn't really have much of a plot, but it's so beautifully written, and it explores these characters' relationships in such a heartwarming way that, you know, that's really what drives your interest throughout it. And it's a very easy book to read. It's one of my favorite books of all time, and I can't recommend it enough. If you haven't read this book, you really need to read it. And the reason why I reread it too is because I really want to read the sequel, which came out 2 years ago, and I still haven't read it. So I just wanted to sort of prepare myself for that by delving back into this book. And to be quite honest, I was going through quite a lot at the time that I decided to reread this book, and it really helped me, you know, just going back to something that is nostalgic and foundational, whether it be a book, a movie, a place, you know, can be so healing. Oh my god. And that's what rereading this book was for me. I love it so much, and I mean, come on, if you haven't read it at this point, you really need to. It's good. I also finally read a classic, okay, Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Isn't this edition gorgeous? This is the Alma Classics edition. It's Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. I did not read Through the Looking Glass. I was going to read it immediately, well, I was planning to read it immediately after Alice, but I didn't read it because I didn't like Alice. I didn't enjoy this story, and I feel bad about it because I always wanted to read Alice in Wonderland, and I always thought that I would like it, but I didn't. I found it to be incredibly jarring, this sort of nonsensical, all over the place storytelling and writing style. I know that's what it's supposed to be. I just found it completely jarring. My brain just wasn't invested in it, and I feel sad because I know that this is the kind of book that you're really supposed to take your time with, even though it's a kid's book, and really kind of try to dig underneath the surface of what everything is supposed to mean, if it does mean something. But I just didn't really have the patience this time around, and I think this is definitely something that's due for a reread. But before I do do that, I will definitely read Through the Looking Glass, and I would like to watch the Disney movie and all the other adaptations. I loved Once Upon a Time. That was one of my favorite shows of all time, even though they ruined it from like arguably season 4 up. Season 4 and 5 were like watchable for me, but season 6 and 7, oh honey, it was bad, especially season 7. Side note, let me know if you'd like me to do a video talking about Once Upon a Time. It won't be anytime soon because I need to rewatch the show, but I've been thinking for years that I want to like do a full-on like analysis of what went wrong. So if that's something you want to see, let me know. But yeah, the reason I mentioned that is because there was a spin-off called Once Upon a Time in Wonderland, and I've heard really good things about that, so I may watch that as well. But suffice to say, didn't like the source material. I'll try Through the Looking Glass. I heard it's a little better. I don't know, y'all could let me know if y'all think that's true. The last book I have to talk about is a very controversial book, quite simply because it's a gay book for kids. It's called I Am a Rainbow by Kanemura. It's a very big book. It's 10 pages long. It is a children's novel that's, it's really, there's nothing much going on. It's about this boy named Mark. I presume it's sort of based on the author's own life. And he is very flamboyant and colorful and likes rainbows, and everybody makes fun of him for it. And then he finds his friends who accept him for who he is, and he becomes a dancer, and he grows up to become this guy. By the way, if you don't know who Mark Kanemura is, he danced for Lady Gaga. That's how I know him. I've known him since I was a kid because he was a background dancer for Lady Gaga, and I am a Lady Gaga stan. And he was also on Drag Race. He danced for other celebrities as well. But recently, I think he's most known for his TikTok. He's the one who does the thing with like all the wigs for Pride, and he like pulls the wigs off. This is not how you pull a wig off. The reason why this book was controversial is because it was selling in the local bookstores here in Trinidad, particularly in a very popular local chain bookstore called RIK. And oh god, somebody went into the store, saw the book. They particularly saw this, and that alarmed them. They took a picture of it, they posted it on Facebook, and they were like, would you let your kids read this? This was selling in RIK or whatever. And the comments, oh, it was bad. Like, the whole country like jumped on this, and people were not happy with this book. People were saying some of them was disgusting things. I find it interesting, especially that people were saying a lot of things about sexuality. They were like, you know, you're teaching kids sexuality and sexual things, and I'm just like, the book had nothing to do with sex. It had nothing to do with sexuality. At no point does the main character in the book say that he's attracted to men or boys. He just wants to be himself. I made a TikTok about it, and I got so much like homophobic comments on that TikTok that I actually had to delete the video or like private it. The interesting thing about it though is that people keep replying to these homophobic people saying things like, well, if you don't want your kids to read it, don't buy it for your kids. This is for people who want to, you know, let their children read that kind of stuff. And and the same thing, like the bookstore even replied saying that, we cater for all communities, and I was really happy that with the bookstore's response and stuff. But everybody kept saying stuff along the lines of like, what's the big deal? If you don't want to read it, if you don't want your kids to read it, don't buy the book. And I'm like, it's not about people, living and let living. That's not how homophobia works. People don't want to live and let live. They want to see the eradication and the annihilation of queerness. And another part of why I just don't really like to engage in these debates is because of the whole children thing. I mean, we see it nowadays with the whole transgender debate that's been happening all over the place, framing it as this like sort of like protecting the children narrative. And I feel like it's such an insult to a lot of people's intelligence to sit down and explain to people that nobody's after your fucking kids. This whole situation evolved into a really ugly mess. I could get into the details, but I really don't want to. And I don't even honestly feel safe talking about it, especially after doing that TikTok. I don't know. Well, so yeah, y'all, that's that's it. I'm sorry to end on a sad note, but those are the books that I read in July and August. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to know if you have any thoughts on them. Thank you all ever so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day, and until next time, inshallah, keep reading.